Umema to start the session.
Good morning, all of you. Thank you all for joining us today for a lecture on gender advancement for transforming institution, fostering equality, leading change, organized by the Internal Complaints Committee, Jamia Millia Islamia. On behalf of ICC, I take the opportunity to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Najma Akhtar, who is also the principal investigator of Jamia's Gati leadership team, for giving us an opportunity to conduct this program. With great pleasure, I would like to welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Pratibha Jolly, who's an outstanding academician and principal investigator, DST-supported Project Gati. I also extend a very warm welcome to all our students, faculty, and guests. Now I invite Professor Hina, Chairperson ICC, for the opening remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Umema. On behalf of the entire Internal Complaints Committee and my Jamia fraternity, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our very distinguished speaker and all the panelists. All the colleagues and my very dear students from the university who joined, and I hope they will be joining. Very warm welcome to the team from team members, Priyanka, and I cannot see the other person from Dr. Pratibha's team. Very warm welcome to Gati members as well, and all the audience who have joined on this Saturday morning of Ramzan and Navratri. That means it's a very auspicious occasion, and I hope that we fulfill this. The intent with which we are starting the series, it is fulfilled. So on that positive note, I also take this opportunity to very quickly introduce ICC at Jamia, because I've realized this is often misinterpreted by our own members as a committee, which is there for all kinds of complaints. So I do very random get complaints of all kinds, like पानी नहीं आ रहा है हमारे डिपार्टमेंट में, to something related to admissions, form नहीं submit हो रहा है, results नहीं आ रहे हैं. So all kinds of, I mean, it's a full. So I thought that at least those audience who have joined us, let me very quickly give a brief history of the formal introduction of this institutional mechanisms which we have adopted at the university to facilitate safe work environment and safe study environment. So the university formally established an apex body of SPERSH, ABS, to sensitize and work to prevent sexual harassment in the university way back in 2011. And at that point, through an ordinance amendment introduction, we introduced this. There was also a special committee called University Complaints Committee, which was there along with ABS for redressal of any such complaints. And then in July 2013, after this POSH Act, which is the acronym for Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition, and Redressal Act, when it came in 2013, we the institute formally implemented the recommendations of the Act and constituted this Internal Complaints Committee. I would now like to introduce, at least to the audience, please know the committee members, the current committee members. I'm Professor Hina, and I'm joined by other members. We have Professor Nilofer Afzal, we have Professor Bulbul, Dr. Umema Faruqi, and Saqib Aziz. We also have an external member, Dr. Veera Gupta, Professor Veera Gupta. She's a very experienced person working in this field from NEPA. Unfortunately, she's not been able to join. She had some other commitments, which she has flagged when we were discussing this event itself. So, plus we also have mandatory 3 members, also from undergraduate, graduate, post-graduation level, and PhD scholars. So there are 3 members. So this is a brief introduction about ICC, the current ICC composition. And let me again reiterate that ICC mandate is to create a safe work environment, safe study environment, and all kinds of explicit, I mean, it works towards gender equality, creating that ecosystem. So we are one of those committees which help in creating that kind of safe environment, which is conducive environment, which is so very important for the growth and fostering women's participation. The theme of this today's talk is also around gender equality and leadership and leading change. Now, as we all know, educational institutions, they do play a very, very critical role for transforming societies at large. And in order to enhance women's participation in all spheres of life, and in particular economic development, it is extremely important to provide safe study and work environment, because we come from the tertiary education sector, higher education, so it becomes even more important. At Jamia, we are committed to promote this at all levels, and we are fortunate to be guided in this endeavor by none other than our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Padma Shri awardee, Professor Najma Akhtar, who also happens to be the first woman Vice Chancellor of Central University. So for today's talk, we have the honor of having another exceptionally visionary leader who has been spearheading this tremendous effort to create an ecosystem for more women leaders, both by setting an example herself and leading and conceptualizing this entire program on Gati on behalf of our Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. So on that note, I would like to invite my colleague, Professor Bulbul James, to kindly introduce the speaker and today's talk. Over to you, Bulbul.
Thank you, Hina. I think it's a tall order introducing a personality like Dr. Pratibha Jolly, who's really academic consultant, National Assessment and Accreditation Council, NAAC. She's also the principal investigator, DST supported project Gati, which is why she's here, Gati, which is Gender Advancement for Transforming Institution. And most importantly, she's been the former principal of Miranda House College. And she served as at that post for 14 years, since 2005 to 2019. And under her amazingly dynamic, leadership, Miranda House was ranked All India first rank under the National Institutional Ranking NIRF, a feat sustained for 5 successful years since then. She has a PhD in theoretical chemical physics from University of Delhi. And she began her academic career in 1980 at Miranda House, where her interests veered towards innovation and research in science education at the tertiary level. From 1988, she moved to the Department of Physics and Astrophysics, University of Delhi, as a research scientist, and joined as principal of Acharya Narendra Dev College, University of Delhi, and then on to her alma mater, Miranda House. She has had tremendous, things to her credit, and I'm just going to name a few. She's chairperson of the International Commission on Physics Education, Commission 14 of the Apex International Union for Pure and Applied Physics for 6 years, 2005 to 2011. She's also been the IUPAP Vice President, elected from amongst the Commission chairs. And the high point of her tenure was the launch of Physware series of active learning, Educate the Educator workshops, so training of trainers really, to strengthen teaching of physics, especially in the developing world. She's also served as a member of the National Liaison Committee, IUPAP, 2008 to 2011. And of course, been conferred with the prestigious medal also from them in 2019 for her contribution to physics education with international outreach. So she's tremendous, experience in trying to tell us how we need to really make our institutions gender inclusive. She's elected Fellow Science and Society of National Academy of Sciences of India, NASI, recipient of the Nasi Booty Foundation Lecture Award 2007, also fellow of the Institute of Physics, and recipient of AU SAD grant as Australian Leadership Award Fellow, Fulbright New Century Scholar Award, American Physics Society, Kilambi, Ram Avatar Ram Fellowship 1994-1995, Tata Fulbright, Travel Grant, Commonwealth Academic Staff. She has many fellowships and awards to her credit, and wide-ranging synergetic contribution she's made to the Indian Association of not just physics, but much beyond that within the Department of Science and Technology. And she's a member of the Scientific Review Committee for Initiation for Research and Innovation in Sciences, which is a DST-initiated program. Task Force and Expert Committee on Star College Schemes, Skill Vigyan Committee, DBT Steering Committee, many committee, and she's pioneered research projects, which have led to pedagogical innovation and development of educational resource material. So I just want to not go on and on about her because you'll hear from her now. But needless to say, I mean, we're very fortunate to have her with us today because she has conceptualized the program of gender advancement for transforming institutions, Gati, under which, with ICC, we are under that label, we are going to look at the pilot. And she's recently launched as a pilot of the Department of Science and Technology. And this is a novel intervention for gender equity in the STEM disciplines. With the launch of Gati, India joins other international gender equality charters. As the PI, she is developing an innovative gender equity framework for self-assessment and accreditation of institutions for higher education and research. 30 leading institutions have recently are on board the pilot. British Council and Advanced Higher Education UK have facilitated a partnership with 6 leading UK institutions. So it's hoped that Gati will usher in deep level systemic change in policies, practices, organizational culture, gender climate of higher education and research institutions in the country. So I welcome you, Dr. Pratibha. And this is just a small blurb of what I could pull out, what I could cull out from there. Welcome you to this webinar, where we look forward to your views on how to move forward on these lines. All yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Bulbul and Professor Hina, and greetings to all colleagues and friends here. It's such a pleasure to be joining you today and get this opportunity to speak about Gati. I thought that I had sent you one small para for introduction, but so be it. But let me simply say that this has been an incredible learning experience for us. I never thought that I would, post-retirement from Miranda House, conceptualize and do something like Gati. This was requested by DST, and so here we are, almost 2 years later. And I do think it augurs well that 30 top institutions have joined, as been said. Allow me to just begin sharing my slides. Because, coming from the science discipline, we somehow enjoy doing PowerPoint presentations. And much as I also do enjoy telling a story. And sometimes just telling a story is often better and having interaction. So I do hope on a later day, we will have another opportunity to just, maybe sit under the banyan tree and chat. But today we are online, so you can imagine that we are still better connected because everybody is hardly 1 foot away from their screen, and so we could never be better connected than this. So do let me know when you begin to see my screen. And do you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
You can see your desktop, not your presentation.
I'm just launching my
yes,
Hina,
we can see that.
And yes, so thank you very much. And I do think it's a great honor to be at an institution such as Jamia Millia, which is just celebrated in 2020, it's 100 years. And I could not find a stamp that you may have launched at 100, but this incredible journey down the history of Jamia was a great learning experience for me. And together with universities such as Delhi University or BHU or AMU, which are also part of the Gati pilot, you were amongst those that were the pillars of Indian Renaissance in education. And if we look at the founders, there's so much to learn. And that legacy was given to us right 100 years back, which was to promote education for progression of all, foster equality for men and women, and promote coexistence in a pluralistic society, which is really the intersectionality of so many identities that all of us carry. And I really did love these lines from your logo by our revered President Zakir Hussain, and where he speaks that, where nothing can sprout, referring obviously to the deserts from where Islam generated, but where nothing could sprout, suddenly the springs of Hidayah or guidance burst forth, and they drench the communities of the heart. So allow me to be precautious, because one must always be precautious when one is forward-looking, and say that Gati is about communities of heart. It is about binding all of us together, and in particular reflecting on where are the opportunities for the women of the country, women of the world, because what I speak of today is a universal problem. So as our universities move forward, they lead, they aim to be amongst the top universities of the world, and we are doing incredibly well now on various international rankings. Modernity and tradition both have to be married together, and it is extremely important then that we carry all the community, the entire population, girls and boys, men and women together with us. And if you were to go down memory lane, then they have been some very remarkable women whose names probably should also be talked about when you talk about the founders of Jamia Millia Islamia. I'm not reading them out, and as I said, these are just illustrations to keep you keyed into my story, really. But what is so important is that we need to celebrate all women, and in particular, with Professor Najma Akhtar being awarded the Padma Shri hardly a couple of years into her tenure, and your first woman chancellor, Professor Dr. Najma Heptullah, who also, I've interacted with on many, many occasions. You could not really have better role models. These are the women for the new age. So you need to connect the dots from the beginning of your institution down to what one is achieving at this point. And Gati, therefore, is a very important dot in this particular journey. And we are proud to have Jamia Millia as a nodal institution with us. Now, there have been so many schemes for women, even before independence, and more so in the last couple of decades. And these schemes for women launched by funding agencies, ministries, etc., have largely focused on scholarships or research grants, or even, taking societal factors into account, helping women manage career break, or establish alternate careers when they want to return after taking a break, or, facilitate mobility. And there has been immense support for women universities. Today, the mantra is really women as entrepreneurs, or promoting their startups or technology parks, etc. And another focus is for science outreach, catching them young, going right into the school and trying to promote that science careers are very important, and in particular important if India is to find its rightful place on the high table of nations. But despite all these schemes, it is said that the needle has not moved. And that really happens when we start looking at, when we speak about all the, look at the statistics and so on. Excuse me, since I'm by myself, I need to just take 1 minute. I really apologize. I think that was so. It becomes, if we look at the gender statistics across the country, despite all these things, nothing seems to have changed. And that is where Gati shifts a focus. We shift the focus from individual women and schemes for promoting individual women to the institution, considering it as a community. And we look at the institution as a self-learning organization. We celebrate and revere the immense scholastic talent in institutions. And we feel that if we just nudge them a bit, we define the problem clearly, then given the talent, and given the problem-solving skills, given the creativity and the humanism in universities, universities can themselves make an impact, and that impact has to be towards equity and equality. So the strategic intent with which one has conceptualized and launched Gati Pilot is to nudge institutions towards supporting diversity, inclusion, and the full spectrum of talent for success and progression of all. And that is why gender advancement is important if you have to be transforming institutions towards greater excellence than exists at the moment. And as has already been said, I'm glad that the documents that we have circulated are being read in detail. We have joined, therefore, the International Gender Equality Charters. Gati is inspired by Hina, which has been operative in UK from since 2005, and which has inspired other programs. It's been adopted in totality in Australia as SAGE, adapted in USA and in Canada as Dimensions. And Gati, however, though inspired, because that is the call of the times, is breaking indigenous ground. It is immensely rooted in our own ethos, and it celebrates our universities and their capacity for change. And therefore, with just a little nudge, we do believe that much can happen in our institutions. So let me quickly say that, with this, we have got a particular international linkage, and we derive our, because it's operated by DST, and that makes it a formal program of the Government of India. And we are looking at it in mission mode. So through DST, its women division, and with an MOU with British Council, and thereby with having through a tendered document bringing advanced HE on board, we have been able to select 6 Athena Swan accredited institutions in UK to partner with the Gati pilot institutions. So Jamia Millia, with 5 other peers in India, is partnering Queen Mary University of London. And I must say there is a difference that we have much to give to this institution as well. So it is a partnership. It is not a mentoring by a UK institution for the Indian institutions. Therefore, with this, we should, with great deal of confidence, also propagate and inform about some best practices and some good things that are happening in our country and in our own institutions. So that said, I think that this peer network can work together and spearhead the kind of change that has been envisaged by Gati. And in this institution are the top IITs and about 10 plus top research institutions of the country and prestigious central universities that I have spoken about. I want to take a minute to talk about how we selected institutions, or more so the data or the insight that we gleaned from the process. At one point, DST felt that we can resist 30 institutions, we can sit across the table and choose, but I really wanted to see how institutions engage with data and what is their understanding of gender equity and so on. So the expression of interest applications did ask for some data, quantitative data, but more importantly, we asked institutions what were the gender initiatives or policies and what was the institutional culture vis-a-vis diversity and inclusion. And it was really an eye-opener that we got fragmented answers. It was as though no institution had ever been asked a question like, what is your gender policy? Institutions were stunned into silence, and top institutions were unable to give to us a cogent reply, a coherent document in this regard. And that really gave us a lot of insight on how to develop in detail the Gati framework. So from those 190 institutions, of which 148 were found to be eligible, we selected 30. I today share with you the data of those pilot institutions which are under the university category, which includes really at this moment the central universities and one private and a couple of state universities. So if you were to look at the number of women faculty which is here in this purplish dot, you will see that this number hovers between 10 to about 30%, and it will be in certain one or two odd universities like Baroda is an outlier that you do have a larger number. But if you were to look at the undergraduates or postgraduates and PhD scholars, that number is rather high. So the research cohort, which we now define as the PhD students and the faculty taken together, and of course the early career faculty or research associates and so on, that is the red dot. And that, of course, yet hovers around 30, 40, or at the most 50. Some places it breaks the gender barrier, which shows there's a large number of women PhD scholars, but not enough in faculty. And this is a data that is, again and again well known. And like Asia tells us that if you were to look at the basic science disciplines, postgraduate or PhDs in physics, chemistry, botany, zoology, then today the women are outperforming men. In fact, in the life sciences, far above at 75%, we break the parity barrier, and that's not good because I'll have more to say on that. But physics, we are still a little far away. But it is in the engineering disciplines, whether it be at undergraduate level, just at 29%, a little better in postgraduate at MTech at 35, or not so good again at if you were to look at the PhD, women are doing rather well in most disciplines except in the engineering disciplines. And faculty, if they're not coming in large numbers, then it is something that we really need to be looking at. And we also need to be worried about not enough men being in the classroom. And I think the next debate and the discussion has to be how to get the men back into academia, get the boys and men back into the classroom and into the teaching profession, where of course they are dominating. So this dichotomy needs to be understood. IITs, in fact, the most prestigious institutions of national importance, whether it be the top-ranked university, the Indian Institute of Science, or the IITs, you can see that the number of women is so less. It's about 15% or an average of about 13%. And that is very, very, something to be looked at. And if you were to compare with the new IITs that were set up in the beginning of this let's say a couple of decades back, then they did not learn from the lessons of the older universities, and they have not made any effort to enhance the women faculty. No effort was made. And so once faculty positions get filled, then sometimes it's very, very difficult to tweak them because there are no vacancies, so there are not sufficient number of vacancies where you can stagger and then have gender equity coming. Same thing for postgraduate, and the faculty now, if you look at the IITs, it is just 13%, both the old and the new, and that is worrisome. So much of female talent, if you are looking at about 75% PhDs in the life sciences, and that's the new horizon in science, and the pandemic has shown that, biotechnology and biosciences and health sciences are going to be so important, and energy is so important, so physics is so important, then you look at engineering is important, and then you find there are not enough women in not getting their share at this. So there's need for strong interventions such as Gati. And very important, you just look at the central university, same thing for Jamia. You, of course, will have overall, you do have 31%, but that's not parity. In science disciplines, that is drops further to 25%. But if I were to look also at NRF, your scores for women and faculty, I do think that a top university should score 30 on 30, but you're far from here. So let me simply say that, therefore, this data poses a question: can't women do science? They can be good students, they can come up to the PhD level, but when it comes to leadership, you have very few women leading universities or research institutions, none leading institutes like IIT. And uh, despite the immense talent, them topping all examinations, why is it that at faculty level in the niche institutions, they are considered as not capable or not having merit enough to be selected? So we need to look at what is the definition of merit and whether there is an obvious bias over here. And this is a global phenomenon, because if you were to look at Nobel Prizes, then you'd be surprised that there are hardly 3.7% women who have been awarded the Nobel in more than a decade, in about 120 years, and so on. In medicine, you do a little better, but same thing is repeated. So if you ask about Nobel Prizes, everyone will speak of Marie Curie, but 4 women in 219 laureates in physics is very, very disturbing. And we, also do discover that systems got stuck for some reason. That a large number of women were bypassed, they were snubbed. Their work was not granted the Nobel, but their supervisor or their collaborators were given the award. So this is something that has been universally noted, that people like Jocelyn Bell, who discovered radio pulsars, or Liz Meitner, who discovered nuclear fission, were bypassed. They were actually snubbed and not rewarded. And the case of Rosalind Franklin, in discovery of DNA helix, is really well known, that Watson and Crick actually had very negative things to talk about her. And, she died very young, but she died uncelebrated in her lifetime. In recent times, there have been a few awards, but that has not been enough. In India, closer home, if you look at Bhatnagar Awards, which is the top science award, again, hardly 3.7% women have got it, and there has been just one in physics. And I point this out because despite the immense talent, women are not getting their due. So we need to look at it. And also the representation in the emerging technologies of the future tends to be very, very small. So the World Economic Forum actually tells us what is the share of the males and the females on, let us say, jobs of the future, technologies of the future, and so on. We all know that the world is going to be driven by data and AI as we go along, or now software as a service, cloud computing is going to be very important. And the share of women is just 26% to 12. Women predominate when you talk of people in culture or media, content production, and other kinds of technical roles, which intersect with the kind of let us say films, or with services and so on. But when it comes to hardcore science and technology, women are underrepresented. And if they're not enough now in our undergraduate courses or postgraduate or PhD programs, then 15 years later, in this volatile world and VUCA world, it's going to be very difficult for women to find jobs, and so that number is going to impact us further. So women have always been unequal at work. If you were to look at the India data in 1990, while there were about 30% women in the workforce, that number in 2022 is down to 21% due to pandemic. It has come down further 2%. And women do so much of unpaid caregiving work. I mean, even professional women lead two lives. They go home and they would be putting in close to 6 hours of unpaid caregiving and household work in comparison to just about 1 hour put in by men. And this just, if you were to account for it, the GDP of the country would be completely redefined. So this is the kind of unequal world in which we are working. And to overcome this gender gap would take about 136 years. And that's largely because of the workforce or the economic gender gap that will take close to 300 years for us to overcome. While in education, the whole world, including the Africas and the Latin Americas and other remote areas, marginalized areas, seem to be doing rather well because of primary education and so on and so forth. But the quality of this education at higher levels and at all levels needs to be talked about. So there is, of course, Sustainable Development Goals are talking about bridging these gaps and bridging them rather fast, but it is a challenge. Like climate change, this is a challenge that must take the forefront and should be on the, given the top attention. This said, looking at the talent of women and their aspirations, can we ignore the potential of women? It's well known that having diversity and a large women workforce is good for business. It is very good for economic growth, and it will help to overcome that almost 200 years gender gap, and therefore economic growth of the world and all countries is going to depend on participation of 50% of its population. So with this, let me say, what is most important today is to understand issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And most of you also from social sciences, you know it well, but I think it is very much worth reiterating what we understand by these words. So we are talking of equity, which is about creating a level playing field for everybody in the workforce, in institutions, and so on and so forth. We are not looking at equality or always gender parity, because it is very important that once we move into the workforce, the opportunity should be the same for everybody. And that is important. I've already said that diversity, which is the composition of the workforce, is very important. We need to get everybody, especially the underrepresented groups, into the workforce and to have societal contributions. And this includes women. We also feel that it's not just about equality, equity, or diversity. What is much more important is to give a sense of belonging and value in the work system to every individual. Because we do have affirmative action, we have our reservation policies, but have they achieved much? Because what is more important is to create an ecosystem where everybody is happy to go to work the next morning and they have a sense of belonging and their contributions are valued a lot. And within this framework, gender poses a very special challenge. So given the data, as I've talked about, first, we do have a large number of women in PhDs, even postdocs and RAs. You are hitting at least 30%. But when they want to come into the niche institutions and look for a job in the academic institutions, if they get in, that number itself, as I've shown in top institution, is far than desirable. In top institutions, it's about 13%. At the most, it will be about 30%. If they do get in, then of course, there is not a leaky pipeline. But what you do encounter is a lot of vortices as you try to move forward. So a postdoc, which is now essential for a job in a top institution, may work but may never be absorbed, or may not even get a job in an equal ranked institution outside, because we are not looking really for inbreeding or whatever. But once you get as an assistant professor, then again, women report experiencing a lot of implicit bias, right up to appraisal and development, and a sense of not belonging, lack of inclusion, recognition, and opportunity. So at every level, this is something that the pipeline does show, that when they go for promotions right up to leadership or achievement and awards, then there's a huge attrition. And it reflects in how few women actually get to be vice chancellors or directors of institution. So developing a diversity intelligence is today a moral imperative, because the quality of the institution will depend upon its capacity to create opportunities and valuable experiences for growth of all. So it is also important that we meet, therefore, the inclusion challenge head on, create, as I said, and I keep reiterating, a sense of identity and belonging, a sense of community. And we have a global perspective for that. So developing diversity intelligence and developing gender intelligence is a challenge for the new millenniums. It is important. And this inclusion challenge is tough because we all do know, and I've also right now said, that women face cultural barriers, they face prejudices, stereotypes, they face explicit and implicit bias, and their role expectations from them. And that all impacts the opportunities they have for recruitment to advancement, from recognition to leadership. It also impacts their share of resources and representation on decision-making committees. It impacts their safety and dignity at all time, which is rather well known. And I think that is where committees such as ICC have a big role to play, because safety and dignity at work is very, very important. Now, this inclusion challenge is important. As I said, it's important for all of us to be aware of the unconscious bias that women experience. All of us, even including women, tend to have stereotypical thinking. We all bring on board conscious and unconscious bias. And implicitly or explicitly, we jump to conclusions and decisions. And this unconscious bias is much more prevalent than conscious bias. But in any form, it warrants concern. It requires reflection and action. And it plays itself out in the case of women in a variety of ways. So let me say that you'll be aware of Matilda effect, which is a bias that works against acknowledging the achievements of those women scientists whose work is attributed to their male colleagues. I already spoke about the case of Jocelyn Bell, who discovered the radio pulsars when she was a PhD student, and the Nobel went to her supervisor. Or Lise Meitner, who discovered nuclear fission, but Otto Hahn is the guy who is the scientist, physicist who was awarded. So this denial of contribution of women scientists is a systematic suppression of information and an obvious bias. And examples are so many that we need to do something about it. And for decades, nothing has happened. And just the opposite of Matilda effect is Matthew effect. And Matthew effect is, the name is derived from the biblical story of Matthew, wherein it is stated that fame begets more fame and status begets higher status. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And, eminent scientists often will get more credit than a comparatively unknown researcher, as we saw in the case of Jocelyn Bell, and so on, even if the work is shared or similar. And we all know that top scientists will get greater funding, better resources, better facilities, the best students will go to them, they'll have a higher publication rate, and they'll get higher citation. Nobody is saying that talent and merit should not be rewarded. But what is being said that this should not be at the cost of ignoring many others. So nobody can rest on past laurels, and others need to be given a chance. So this gender equality is the crux of Gati, and it is very well articulated in the Constitution. It is a part of international charters. It makes its appearance in the SDGs, etc. And in our own country, we have the right to equality, right against discrimination, freedom to practice any occupation, right to life with dignity, and humane conditions at work. And we today, have the POSH Act. We have to renounce any practice which is derogatory to the dignity of women. And it is a statutory requirement to have an internal complaint committee against sexual harassment in all institutions. So the issue of addressing gender in a very significant or foundational way has been talked about since the last century, end of last century. For example, gender mainstreaming talks about reorganization, improvement, development, and evaluation of all policies and processes so that a gender equality perspective is incorporated in all policies at all levels, at all stages, by the actors normally involved in policy making. So all institutions by now should really have had equity. And because it is not reflected in the gender statistics that I shared with you earlier on, therefore there is need for more initiatives and so on and so forth to nudge that gender mainstreaming become a part of the DNA of institutions. And to bring about that mainstreaming is not simple, because it engages communities or individuals. Policies of institutions or institutional structures cannot be changed with ease. You need to have well-oiled machinery where every individual, a member of the community, is involved, so that some transformative change occurs and outputs are visible. So you need very well-deliberated actions towards gender equality for visible outputs and results of mainstreaming. But as I've already demonstrated to you, institutions are gendered social settings. They bring all kinds of stereotypical thinking, both men and women. So by gender, when I do not mean only the female members of the community, I mean both. And societal forces overtake us, and therefore it is very, very important that we should look at the lens of policies through a progressive outlook for both men and for women. So with this, we have proposed 10 key principles at the Gati Charter, and all directors and presidents and vice chancellors of institutions have signed on it. And I do suggest that this is given great publicity by the Gati team, the Gati self-assessment team steering the process, and by ICC. And do get every individual in your community to sign on this charter. And here is a summary of that. And this is really summarizing all that I have said so far, that you pledge to uphold diversity, inclusion, and equity, pledge to value and nurture talent of all, and understand that genders are equally capable, and advance in particular gender equity in STEM discipline, address obvious bias and harassment, and ensure career advancement leadership gets a level playing field, and look at institutional structures and policies. And all this cannot happen unless the leader is strong. It has to be both top down and bottom up, and systemic changes require community participation. More importantly, you need to have an enabling gender climate and culture, organizational culture, and you need to sustain these key principles for transformative change. So explicitly acknowledge the problems through the evidence base that I have demonstrated to you. We are not into rhetoric. We are not using big words. We are basing everything on data and on narratives that are always available. You just have to stop in the corridor and talk to people, and you know what bias is all about. So integrate these Gati Charter principles in the institutional strategic vision. So the model of Gati that has been adopted is one of self-assessment and accreditation. You should be very much familiar as a central university that has through NAAC got A++. So these processes are very familiar to an institution such as JMI. We begin with a well-structured self-assessment application. We collect data and evidence and critically analyze it, examine policies and processes, and identify what are the problems. So unlike NAAC, the focus here is on identifying barriers and challenges and impediments that women in particular face in STEM disciplines, and by analyzing, reflecting, ideating, develop some specific, measurable, achievable, and relevant and time-bound action plans for that. And in this process, we are here to mentor and facilitate. We are here to help you to create your self-assessment application as a winner would, and this will be peer-reviewed for the Gati Award at the end of 18 months. So the indicator framework has 7 criteria. It also puts the Gati self-assessment process as an evaluative process, because unlike NAAC or NRF is purely quantitative and automated and computer-driven. NAAC has 70% quantitative, which is computer-driven, and 30% which is peer-reviewed and qualitative. Here we are going to have just everything is qualitative, because the problem is such that we are looking at community. We are looking at change of heart of communities and following the Gati Charter. So the journey itself needs to be documented. Then, of course, we will look at the profile of the institution. Your data is very important. So the entire gender statistics will define your profile. But then we will look at gender advancement, career progression, and leadership along the academic pipeline that I graphically have already shown to you. We will look at all policies, processes, procedures, and practices, and how you are looking at them through the gender spectrum and mainstreaming. I'll have more to say about all this. At the heart of the Gati framework, however, is gender climate and organizational culture. And we want in this process to celebrate some best practices that you already have. Because as I said, institutions do not function in vacuum. We are merely nudging you to do far better, but with so much of scholastic talent and your legacy of and commitment in your vision to nurturing equality and giving a level playing field, you would have many instances to uphold these values. And then finally, we want to see how you can keep alive the Gati Charter principles through relevant, measurable, specific action plans way beyond the period of the pilot. And you'll be assessed on these. So let me elaborate today on a bit more on this. So this is the charter journey. You have been selected as one of the 30 pilot institutions. By signing the Gati Charter, the Vice Chancellor is committed to upholding it. And I expect that every member, student, staff, support staff, faculty should sign on the Gati Charter. This should become part of our lives. And we have shared the Gati framework. You have formed the Gati self-assessment teams. They have been oriented. I myself met with them at least on 4 occasions, and data collection would have begun. And now you need to start analysis and reflection and develop actions and submit the application by October 31st. So a 18-month journey that began in August 2021, you can see that already you are almost 6 to 8 months into the journey. So it's time now to sprint and no longer just the orientation, but get down to hardcore work on it. And then this application will be peer reviewed for a Gati Award to be given in February 2023. But application is due in October end 2022. So this self-assessment application, as I've said, provides a structure. It gives a backbone of assessment, but it is, though I have shown you the data, it was to demonstrate the problem. Gati is not about numbers. It is not about quantitative data alone. It is not alone about gender statistics, but it is an opportunity to have gender mainstreaming, to review policies and focus on how to make sense of that evidence that is being presented by institutional data. Examine the patterns and interpret, connect the dots for the larger picture, identify the barriers, impediments, challenges, and opportunities for gender equity. And in all this, obviously, tables and visual representation will help you. But at the end of the day, you have to develop actions for sustainable change and to be able to show that we do move towards a level playing field, a sense of belonging for women, and gender statistics improves. I do not expect that in 18 months you will be able to move the needle so much that you will move from 13 or 25% women to having 50% women. So we have not got any outlandish expectation. But what you can certainly do is create policies that are enabling and which over time will yield results. So, as I said, at the heart of Gati is to change the vocabulary of institutions. And this vocabulary requires that every individual member of the community understands what is gender climate. Gender climate is determined by the perceptions and expectations of the community. It is defined by the interactions between students, staff, administration, and leadership. It requires a cumulative reflection on all policies, processes, procedures, practices, programs, and plans, and the perception of the community about them. And it is going to be, I'm being interrupted. Someone, Nilofer Afzal, requesting to annotate shared content. Kindly do not do that. Kindly respect the professional ethics of a talk being given. And the day-to-day functioning is impacted by many things. It is impacted by the hierarchical structures in infrastructural facilities, how resources are shared, what are the professional and social interactions. And this feeling of what the gender climate can change from minute to minute. At one moment, you may think that, oh, my institution does nothing. My application for applying for a research grant has been languishing in the office for about 1 month, and I'm going to miss the deadline. And you say nothing moves in this institution. But lo and behold, if it arrives even 15 minutes before the last deadline for submission, you say, oh, what a lovely institution, it responded to my call. So your perception of a climate can change. But what is important is to have a strong baseline based on processes that are well oiled and the machinery well works, that nobody gets a feeling that, some people's work gets done earlier and others' work never gets done. Some people always get the best resources and others do not get enough. So this kind of equitable sharing is very, very important. Organizational culture, and who would know better than JMI, is very much more difficult. It mirrors the deeply rooted assumptions and ideological values held by individual members of the community. And a lot of effort is required to alter those beliefs and value systems through thoughtfully designed sensitization programs and activities. I do think this is what ICC does all the time, that it aims to impact the organizational culture. And that is really reaching out to the heart. That's why I began with, the most difficult part in anybody's life or in an institution's life, including at Miranda House, a women's institution, was to build a community of the heart. Everybody upholds the same set of values, the same constitutional values, and has the same liberal progressive outlook. And, it does not really get, so it does not matter what identity we have. I always say that, we all are rooted in our own individual place of belonging, our upbringing, and our practices and all. But university is a great leveler. Once we come to the institution, then it lays on us a new identity. And that identity is of the set of values, the vision, mission, legacy of that institution, which is far beyond the set of values all of us bring as individuals. And that is why then we get known as alumni of a great institution. And that is what defines the organizational culture. And intervention programs have a critical role in creating this distinctly perceptible organizational culture and identity. And gender equity or a sense of belonging cannot happen unless we take pride in the set of values and rise above our own ways of thinking. Because in a society or in an institution, we have to be dictated by what is the larger purpose of an educational institution. So Gati follows the action research methodology. As has been said, you have any focus area, which is a criteria or sub-criteria. You collect evidence and data. By data, I mean both quantitative and qualitative, narratives and anecdotes and stories included. You analyze and reflect, and then you act, evaluate, and refine. And action research really does this as an iterative loop to solve any problem. You plan, observe, analyze, reflect, and act. And we expect that you will do at least one cycle of this in the lifetime of Gati pilot, which is 18 months, so really 15 months, because the last 3 months are for evaluation of your exercise. To understand community perception, their ways of thinking, their own cultural values, you need to interview. You need to have anecdotes, stories, and narratives. You need to have a innovative and credible community engagement through surveys, audits, structured feedback, open feedback, discussions, debates. And this is the heart of Gati. Because quantitative data, you'll find it in hardly 1 week. Look, I found your data, which I'll be showing to you very quickly in a couple of days through your website. We could be off by about 5%, but that doesn't change much anything. So this is the heart of the Gati problem. And we all know that women also bring stereotypes. Men have very, very stereotypical thinking about women, and the same world is viewed differently by men and women. So gendered experiences are important. For example, one famous survey shows that women look at the gender discrimination at work to be very high. Men also feel they have discrimination, but not in the same numbers. And women earn less for the same job, as have been said. They're often bypassed for important assignments. They're treated as though not competent. At least women think so in large numbers. They feel isolated at workplace, and they do feel that they experience in large numbers sexual harassment. They face discrimination. Almost 50% women say that they face discrimination in recruitment, hiring, and promotion, and that their gender makes it harder to succeed at work. And balancing work family, especially in STEM jobs, is really a challenge. So we need to evolve tools for transformation. And many times we congratulate ourselves. Ours is a gender blind institution. We treat both men and female the same way. But that is not the way to go. Because how can you ignore the societal role that women have? The 6 hours of unpaid caregiving many of them go and do when they go back home. You can't be gender blind, because society has given unequal work to women, and that needs to be respected and facilitated. Instead, some institution will say, we are gender aware, we accommodate. Okay, so meeting is going on, so you say, oh, you can leave early, the meeting will go on. And 5 times that happens, you'll say, never call that female professor into this group because she's going to leave early. And therefore, she is short-circuited out of the system. So we cannot always just say that you have been accommodating, working around gender differences, somebody else will step in and all. We need to have them as proactive, 100% equal participants in all institutional functioning. That requires institutions to be gender responsive, which means that create policies and structures and ecosystems that help to overcome the barriers and challenges that genuinely females experience, also because of another role that they play, and stimulate these changes in the entire institution, and have a holistic understanding that an individual is not just a professional or a employee, goes beyond that, and that we have to facilitate. And that is the goal of gender equity. So work-life balance is very, very important in today's world, as I will demonstrate to you, not only for women, but also for men, because today men are also getting increasingly engaged in nurturing of their families, and the stereotype of male as a breadwinner and female as a home or caregiver is no longer valid, where both members are working. So we need to look at it. So Gati expects that you will make a community of practice, which is your community of the heart. It is a community where you will develop shared goals, practices, values, and understanding. I am trying today to nudge you to develop a new vocabulary and have a new vocabulary for both male and female stakeholders, and a sense of identity, and a renewed look at social cultural practices and strategies, evolve a common understanding that will give a sense of belonging to all, and develop this process of social learning and knowledge sharing to develop new tools, techniques, and new competencies, and share these resources and experiences which are based on data, and find solutions and share these best practices. So a community of practice is a technical word where you are looking at any domain or any focal problem. It could be your focal problem or domain could just be organizing an event such as this. From there, you could grow into the functioning of ICC. From there, you may go on to the functioning of a particular department or the whole university. So these are growing circles that will then encompass the whole institution and all its policies. But you begin small. So a committee also has to have a shared vocabulary and set of values and tools and techniques before it can take any decision and implement them. So institutional transformation is a great opportunity for personal growth. Gati is a great opportunity for becoming, for self-evolution, and needs to be looked at like that. So now that is the heart of Gati. And as I said, we have several criteria. Maybe as time is short, I'm not going to dwell on each of them. So I take the liberty of jumping a few of them. But I've already said give visibility to Gati and its charter, engage with the community and build a community of practice, and create this growing circle of allies and stakeholders. So this is very, very important. And look at the data, which is the easier part of Gati. And I will show to you some of your own data and leverage the existing data sources like NRF and ASHE and so on and so forth. It is well defined and well articulated in the guidance handbook that we have given. And I do expect that GSAT members should share with all heads of departments and whoever wants to look at it, especially with ICC, the entire self-assessment application and guidance. And the funding is being given, you can print and give a copy to everybody as well. So if you were to look at this gender profile across the pipeline of Jamia, you will see, I'm just reiterating what has been said here, that your undergraduate students also in STEM domains are not enough. Postgraduate is always a little better. PhD is also a little better, often far better, and nudged higher because of biosciences and all, but faculty stands hardly at 25%. And research cohort, which includes postdocs, research associates, etc., is often a bit more. And this needs to be looked at in a very, very careful way. And this is just telling you the same thing, but you can see that faculty is really the challenge. And I don't expect that in 18 months you'll be able to nudge for more recruitment of women. But what you can certainly aim for is better practices so that the obvious bias is removed and you advertise in more gender responsive manner and so on and so forth. But if you were to look at the PhD scholars in detail, you will be surprised that, in biosciences, more women, biotechnology, also more women. Chemistry is a little close to 50%. Come to physics, it starts dropping, and even humanity is not enough. Engineering, far less. Computer engineering, very, very less, and so on. So this tells a story. And what also tells a big story is how many of you rise to professorial level? Not enough. So if they're not enough women at professor level, how will they be into leadership? How will they get the bigger grants? How will they be into the decision making in large numbers? Though, of course, you do have some in large number of deans in some sense. So we are looking at this advancement and career progression in leadership in a very, very structured way. And we are nudging you to look at your policies and for recruitment, for induction programs, startup grants and seed money that is given. We're looking at training and capacity building and how you do performance appraisal and development reviews. And more importantly, for supporting this progression to promotion and to leadership. That is important. So let's go back to the academic pipeline, which has said has too many vortices and so on. So of course, first is increase the inflow. For students, enrich the curriculum, have better mentoring training programs and better women role models, therefore. In recruitment, you need fair and transparent and search and gender balance panels. You need obvious bias training for those who sit on recruitment panels. You need also to have spousal hiring policies now and practices, because increasingly, sometimes women are the ones who will drop out because both members of, the partner did not get the job in the same city. In Delhi, that's not that big a problem. I mean, you can help get a job, if not in the same university, elsewhere. But sometimes, someone cannot be rejected just because was equally competent and a job went to one of the members, mostly male. And then when you advance to doing your research, you need to have greater visibility for influential roles. So organizational climate and culture is going to impact all this progression. At the moment, there's huge amount of attrition, as my data has already shown. And as an outsider, I can bring the data. It will be maybe some small errors if you've not updated your website, but that is the small part of the challenge and so on. So please look at the recruitment policies, get the gendered language to be responsive, Just adding one line, women are encouraged to apply, can sometimes bring more people. So look at the data of how many people apply, how many women apply, how many are short listed or scrutinized out, and then what happens by the time they go up to the selection interview and so on. And as I said, look at the wording and so on. And what is important is at appraisal. Women have a feeling if they went for maternity leave or took childcare, then they really lose out in comparison to their peers who are at similar level. And also, some form of mentoring is important also for early career researchers, because we work so hard for PhD scholars, then we need to help them to get niche jobs. Not necessarily in the same university. In fact, I mean, it should be in other institutions, because it will bring fame to the parent university and so on. So fair, transparent review methodology and sharing and mentoring is very important, so that the person knows how they could have done better, how they can put in their appraisal application in a better way, and so on. So institutional support goes a long way in enhancing performance, and this recognition is always inspirational, and so on. And so, training and capacity building today is a part of all of faculty development programs and all, but it has to include many other things, because what is it that defines professional skill and competencies? Collaborations, networking, communicating, negotiating, the institutional policies, administrative processes, and financial resource sharing and management all make a difference. And we somehow tend to only focus on domain, pedagogic, technological, and research, go for a conference, organize a seminar and all these kind of other skills that go into making a professional very robust, they are not talked about. So you need to do much more for equal professional growth opportunities to all individuals. And Priyanka just looked at this yesterday, and thank you for this slide, Priyanka, and many others. It's a lot of teamwork. So we're looking at how you actually do have a nice HRD center, and you do a leadership training program. I myself used to get a lot of invites for to come in and to look at that, and leadership training happens, but much of it can be improved, in the sense that our outreach has to be far more. So you need to go beyond just refresher and orientation courses, and look in particular for women and minority communities and social categories, and see how we can improve that. What is far more important is the hand-holding to bring women to managerial or decision-making committees, and that requires a policy initiative. You need to look at it, because sometimes women themselves are hesitant. Sometimes they may at that point say, no, I can't take on this role because maybe the child is in a grade 10th or 12th, or there is caregiving at home. But that doesn't mean that they should now be thrown out of the system for all time to come, because 6 months later she may be available, so she needs to be opted in again for a bigger role. So inclusion of women in decision making is very, very important, because women's voice matters. We need to value their perspective, and that brings equity and advancement. So do look at the representation on decision making committees, which is part of our Gati criteria. I'm not putting in the numbers here, but once you go through it, that will be available. Like I said, already you do have many voices that are, and thank you, Hina, you are right here. You head your department, you head ICC, and Simi is our nodal person, and I hope she's here today. But there are others, and I knew Professor Kidwai rather well. And when he was at mass communication, did a workshop there on video making and so on. But I mean, that's a famous center, and having a woman director is so lovely. And so a large number of women are now coming up. But if the data is speaking volumes, if they're not enough women recruited and far fewer in professorial roles, then the same few women are overburdened with committee work. And that will be at the cost of their professional growth. So you see how a cycle, I mean, the whole thing gets, the jigsaw really works against the women very frequently. So, and then for promotion, this extramural work or committee work is not given recognition, because that is voluntary extra work. So, promotion needs to look at the work that is done way beyond the call of the duty and so on. And there should be equitable sharing, especially because women are in such few numbers. So that matters. But I'm so glad that many of you are leading from the front. So do look at the policies, processes, procedures, which is the heart of Gati. How do you support work-life dynamics? What is the infrastructure and welfare support? What is the dignity at work, which ICC is there? You invited, so I should really have focused on this, but it all fits into the entire jigsaw. You can't look only at dignity at work unless, because not being gender responsive in other areas is not going to help you to have dignity. So if you're bypassed for a promotion or a tough assignment, then what is the dignity at work? Dignity at work is not only about sexual harassment. It is about having your voice heard and your opinion being valued. So audits, reviews, and resources are important. So do look at all institutional processes, the work-life balance, the well-being, and dignity at work. And we are looking at how resources are shared across genders, whether there are enough budgeting done for women-related needs sometimes, and how do they figure in strategic plans, and work life, maternity and childcare and those things are given, but they also bring in challenges, because how do you prioritize giving of CCL and so on? How do you help somebody returning from a care responsibility or CCL to ease back into the full professional workload, etc.? And counseling today is very, very important. So I'm sure you are doing rather well on infrastructure, etc. But as I said, I want to focus today on the new age families and the role of men and the role of men as allies. And that gender is not just about women. It is about both male and female. It is not about only the girl and the girl students or the young women students. It's also about the young men who are students here and who will go on to become family men and who must become engaged family men, and take on roles and responsibilities, so that this unpaid caregiving is not only, or infant care or child rearing is not only the woman's job. That is the call, because we want 50% representation of women in the workforce now, and as paid for equal work, equal pay for equal work. And that's important. And this is changing. So I think please celebrate the men. Gati wants you to celebrate the men and hear their voices. And this is where I have a huge problem with ICC and many other committees, that, we sometimes are not paying enough attention to that the male colleagues are progressive. Or let us take the moral high ground and presume that they are progressive. They have no choice then but to be progressive. And that is the way Gati is nudging you to change the vocabulary. So the landscape has changed more so with the pandemic. It's technology driven. We now see the real virtual hybrid modes. As I said, I'm just 1 foot away from each of you. Because and you can see and hear me far better than if we were in a seminar hall, where people on the back bench will just be chatting, or they will have a phone which is just recording and not be engaged. So this is so important. And we are all working anytime, anywhere, 24/7 on the first weekend of Ramza and on the Navratri day and so on. And I had to open the door because my neighbor was banging because they wanted to send me some prasad. And, I had to get up because somebody has to, they would not understand that I'm at a meeting. So it's all 24/7. And, we have no distinction between work and non-work. And that is important. And we are juggling roles and multiple responsibilities, interests, and needs. So in this challenging landscape, there's also the evolving role of male, female, spouses, partners, families. Even young kids today will lay the table or help in the kitchen and learn to do their own thing when parents are away and so on. So the dual career couples are redefining the norms, and the engaged fathers are breaking the stereotypes. no longer is it the breadwinner homemaker model. How realistic is it? And how much do the young males in this audience today, they also do want to have a very progressive family. They also want to contribute, males being super chefs, they also want to be able to contribute to the family dinner sometimes, and so on and so forth. So it is so important to have some data on them. And then to say that the policy, therefore, has to also go with this, and gender responsive policy review should take the new evolving role for spousal partners, and for that they may have a male caregiver, may have need for flexi time as much as a female caregiver, or in a working family, sometimes 100% of the work is done by the male partner, sometimes 100% is done by the female partner, depending on which is a better way to do certain things, and so on. So equitable family and care responsibilities will evolve when we become and spearhead the change. And let Jamia spearhead this change, because your impact as role models and progressive institutions will be immense. So get everybody to sign the Gati Charter, understand family needs, hear the men's voices, and evidence and research will matter quite a lot. So I'm sure you already have gender responsive infrastructure. This is the easier thing to do. But what is very, very important is that dignity at work matters. So Priyanka has been working a lot on some of this, and do invite her sometime to ICC so that she can approach dignity at work from the Gati perspective on how we are talking about these things. It goes beyond preventing or sexual harassment or handling a complaint. But complaints need to be handled in letter and in spirit, because very often people feel that it is not, timely action is not taken, or no action is taken, and so on. People close ranks. So the approach also has to be reformative. It is not always that we are going to be looking at, we should not prejudge either. So family support services, safety, security, and is important. I want to today speak of two things. One is bullying and harassment. And anti-ragging laws are very much there as part of UGC, and we do implement them. But it is important to understand that bullying takes place at various levels, especially this intersectionality of gender with other social categories, and including economic and so on. So this happens in a very big way. So we need to look at this, and sometimes the grave consequences can impact the institution's reputation. So we need to look at this in a very sensitive way. I do think ICC should, considering you are the one-stop complaint committee, Hina, you have no choice, but you need to address this in a serious way. And cyber safety risks being on, the dark web is really troublesome now, and the risks are on rise. And, we think that strong policy interventions are needed, because social manifestations like with strange names of the apps have been very, very disturbing. So policies are needed for this, and early enough training and sensitization programs should become part of this. So cyber safety is very important, and sensitization to preventing getting into this, or remedial measures, and also firewalls, as well as taking action when people are caught engaging in this, becomes important. One thing which institutions don't have is policy and personal relationship between staff and students. Because, universities are founded on the principle of great collaboration and trust and confidence. I myself have had male mentors and collaborators, and we have enjoyed immensely growing together, and learning together, and so on and so forth, and mentoring is important. So, however, in human relationships, sometimes intimacy develops. Now, if that is forced, it is an abuse of hierarchical position, and it is a breach of professional integrity, erosion of trust and confidence, and conflict of interest between faculty and students, and or a tutor. It could even be a postdoc who is giving tutelage to a PhD scholar, or undergrad or PhD, and a teaching assistant. Anyone can be in that hierarchical role, And if this happens, it jeopardizes the reputation career of the individual and has a domino effect on the institution. For example, recently, Michigan University has done a settlement of 460 million for a physician who was in the sports arena. He was responsible, he was providing the medical, looking at the medical unit, and he abused both male and female sports persons. And they came up and lodged years afterwards complaints, which were then settled out of court at 460 million. And Michigan University is paying for settling that. So going beyond the geography and time, and that person is dead, he's gone. But the litigation continued, the settlement continued, and it is now that is settled. So the domino effect and on the reputation and career of institution is tremendous. So have a policy that when it is abuse of hierarchical position, it has to be handled differently. But sometimes, human beings put together, a genuine affection or intimacy develops. Then the policy for that also should be clear. It should be disclosed so that the institution can take measures without being judgmental to separate from the professional relationship, because a teacher and a student, and then it's a conflict of interest. So that person can no longer be the sole supervisor in case, should not be the supervisor, but sometimes the work is in such an advanced stage that a similar specialist cannot be formed. Then you need to create and it's possible to create alternatives or buffers, etc. So these policies are missing in our country and they need to be created and so on. I'm sure you have student wrestle, which works rather well and all. So look now at gender climate in organizational culture. I've already spoken a lot about that. Look at how gender enriches curriculum, how it cross-cuts curriculum. We have asked for that, how it creates inclusion and diversity sensitization and orientation program, and how gender issues are there in curriculum research, and how you can, through feedback and surveys, find out whether students are being impacted by it. Look at your own programs now as what is the impact of them. And therefore, this is a research study. Look at the workload models of committees and extramural work, which I've already spoken about. Increase the visibility and of the role models and nominate more women for awards so that they can be recognized and have outreach activities. So the world is not designed for women. Research shows that there were not enough spacesuits designed for women's bodies. So a spacewalk could not occur when there were a large number of women astronauts on a space trip. And women are 17% more likely to be injured because the airbag in car is not designed for the physiology. The headphones are not designed for women physiology. They suffer more hand injuries while playing the piano. They can be misdiagnosed for heart attack because the medical research on that does not focus on the female of the species. It is all tested on male of the species. And most of the research tests in controlled experiments only the male animal and not the female. So how would we sure what will be the reaction of drugs on women, because they have a very different biology. And Google also understands male speech far better than female, and so on. So it's a man's world in many ways, and therefore it is important that when we do research, the gender dimension in research is looked at. So in Europe, you cannot apply for research projects under one scheme, HOPE, unless you have said what will be the gender component of this science research. Will you be testing on which animal or what component? So how will it impact women or female of the species when you do your research? So in science research, look at the gender component in hardcore science research, but also look at research on gender and have cross-cutting themes. For example, our cities designed for women, Hina, you know better than any other, is architectural design, looking at gender aspects and so on, and bring this synergy between STEM and non-STEM disciplines in this, because it is going to be wonderful that we do break these barriers. Under NEP, this is mandated, and as multi-discipline university, you are the ones who can be leaders. You have engineering, you have dentistry, which has got large number of women, and I think you may have a medical school soon, and so on and so forth. So you could be doing many of these things, but increase the visibility of women, because this should be Gati website should have it. All departments should have on their web pages highlight the contribution of women, because they have to be the role models. They are a minority at this moment, and it is important. And I must congratulate your women scientists who have just been awarded with the prestigious PM Research Fellowship. And this happened because the Vice Chancellor nominated or nudged that women be nominated. If they're not nominated, they're not in the running at all. And so I must say there would be others, but do showcase and have a higher visibility for all these young, bright young women, because they will then nudge other prospective students to follow in their footsteps. And these footprints are very, very important. And your alumni have done rather well. But I would like, therefore, to be able to easily find the women scientists in this list. And that is always a challenge. Even for Miranda, sometimes it's a challenge. As an all-women institution, we may have a Padma Shri almost every year, and our women alumni have done very well. That's the matter for another talk. But do we get similar trailblazers in the science? And that needs to be looked at, and do share some of that data with us and so on. But that said, Gati is really your opportunity on the continuum, because this is a work you've been doing, but we are now bringing it all together, and we are saying take charge to move the needle. And the canvas for institutional mentoring is really huge. You can do it through your seminars, conferences, or sensitization programs and talks such as this one. You can do through internships, through societies and film clubs, and many other things, through drama and writing workshops and whatnot. So the canvas of liberal education ecosystems such as of Jamia is huge for bringing about change that Gati is nudging. And that's important. Your education outreach is so fantastic. We were looking at your Balak Mata centers established 1938, much to be proud of. But science outreach is important. So how many children were denied exposure to science because the women, the mothers, were not aware of science? So perhaps you want to bring in some component of, playing around with the gizmos and tinkering with the, like the Atal Tinkering Labs, etc., into these existing infrastructures. So science outreach is something that we are nudging you to do. Catch them young, because otherwise, we'll also need 300 years to get women into the parity mode in our institutions. So catch them young and celebrate the vision and legacy of people such as Dr. Kidwai, and your 1938 initiative still going strong at your 3 centers, but very, very important to introduce the scientific element, the technological element, because the work of the future will require women technicians also, women in AI, in data, in everything. And they're not going to get to it unless the mothers begin adopting, even in their, let us say, tailoring exercises, the new technologies and so on and so forth. It's an economic win-win. So that's important. Glad that your innovation entrepreneurship Gurukul, at least one example that Priyanka found was that one woman in the 3 co-founders, and very, very happy, and very happy to hear Khansa Fahad say that it's not just a story of success. Our story is a story of unhazed dreams and an unwavering faith to create a more learned and empathetic world. And that is also the objective of Gati, that each for equal, fostering equality, leading the change. And I must, since I'm here and Bulbul is here, talk about your Women's Studies Center and all that you do here for your academics and outreach and advocacy. It's exemplary practice. Do mainstream gender for science, because break the silos, break the boundaries, and look at curriculum, look at research, community development initiatives, because the scientists need that hand-holding. Sometimes they feel this is not our work, but it is everybody's work. If I can do it, everybody can do it. I'm as much of a science person as anyone else, but once administration came to me and I was asked to do Gati, I'm approaching it as an administrator. So I'm looking at it with available data resources and what is within easy reach of our institution. As an education innovator and pedagogy innovator, I do feel that this is exactly what we do in innovation in education. We talk to people, we understand the learning difficulties, and we create experiences to transform. And that is exactly what is action research. So to summarize, feedback based institutional transformation is important. Handhold, break the silos, redefine organizational culture. For that, redefine social culture, survey and find out how people think, what should be done. Look at professional training, mentoring, growth opportunities, flexibility. Look at hierarchical structures, create a more egalitarian institution. Look at the work culture, work-life dynamics, and improve representation of females. And therefore, this is all cross-cutting, they're overlapping dimensions. Look at gender climate and organizational culture. And it's not a deficit model. We're not here to punch holes in ye nahi ho raha, wo nahi ho raha kind of a thing. We are here to celebrate what you're doing rather well. That's why my slides here, actually, we have highlighted. We've looked for what you're doing so well, but there will be many, many other things. This is just illustrative. So tell us about your case studies and tell us about your personal narratives and uphold your institutional values and talk about it and how you want to go further. Most importantly, while explicitly we are not looking at it, implicitly we want you to examine the intersectionality of gender with religion, with age, with disability, with race, ethnicity, language, region, class, caste, everything, and the full gender spectrum going beyond the binary to the LGBTQ plus. And today, transgender is understood as a constitutionally recognized LGBTQ not at so far. But what we need to look at is that executive authority allows us a lot of scope for creating those practices. And it is important that we do it. And having done that, lastly, create beyond the lifespan of the IT pilot, smart action plans and implementation strategies. 3 smart action plans. By smart, specific, measurable, time-bound, achievable, and relevant, based on all the studies you carried out and raise resources within for 18 months implementation beyond the Gati, and 2 that can be implemented long-term over 36 months. For example, recruitment may require a longer time span, and integrate and assimilate the core principles of the Gati Charter. So for a summary, our focal point is tracking key indicators of gender equity through institutional data collection and analysis systems, and undertaking workplace climate and culture assessment, which includes all policies, processes, and value systems, and through feedback and surveys and dialogic instruments. And you have a collaborative leadership, both bottom up and top down. And we are here to provide you external support and guidance and share our knowledge base. We'd be very happy to share, but there are challenges, the challenges within every individual, within the community. Community resistance is what we need to overcome. And that can be done with more and more male allies and celebrating their best practices and their synergy. And let each be a Zakir Hussain or a Kidwai. And that is how Jamia can also be accredited very high, as it is on NAAC, on Gati. It is important. So let us therefore say, we are here to catalyze change, to nudge you, develop a shared vocabulary, have demonstrated, to overcome obvious bias, change the mindset, very difficult, uphold the statutory obligations on diversity, inclusion, affirmative actions, look and create oversight mechanism for gender policy framework, have affirmative action on gender responsive budgets, build trust, accountability, and transparency. We are not a deficit model. Gati also celebrates your best practices, and your own gender vision and agency will allow Gati to progress beyond 18 months. And Pilot Institution is a critical actor, and I'm here, and my team is here as a critical friend. So just reach out. I'm a phone call away at any time on this. So that said, creating a research team is the greatest challenge, because this is a work that is difficult and it has few returns and so on. But Priyanka has been with me, Rosa has been with me right from the beginning. It's a huge challenging work because it is 24/7, and it is one that is done in the background. But it is done for you so that you may be the stellar stars. Thank you so much.